And I looked up and I was like, oh my God, it's Dave Flint. And I texted my friend about it and she was like, girl, he's been an advisor for them this entire time. I don't know how I missed that, but shout out to him because he's awesome. Hello, and welcome back to Sarah Says So, your go-to show for women's sports news. Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to episode 6. We have a bunch of stuff to talk about today, especially in the wake of the PWHL Draft. But, of course, before we move forward, make sure you're following the show on all socials. So that's at Sarah Says So ETB on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. So, without further ado, today's lineup, we're going to be going over the 2025 PWHL Draft, talking a little bit about the new expansion team coaches, 3 women entering the Hockey Hall of Fame, and then some WNBA news from around the league as well. So, Lynx ownership sale, Caitlin Clark struggling, and more. So, we've got a lot to talk about on this lovely, lovely Friday. So, we're going to get right into it, starting with the Boston Fleet and their moves in the 2025 PWHL Draft. So the Fleet had the 2nd overall pick just based on how the draft order is kind of decided, basically because they had a really crappy season. So with their round 1 pick 2 selection, they took defender Haley Wynn from Clarkson University. Something I'm pretty excited about. I think going defense early for the Fleet was a pretty strong move considering the fact that they lost 5 defenders in the whole period of losses. So the signing period, the expansion draft, and the signing window, kind of within there, they lost 5 defenders and then 3 forwards. So definitely looking to build their defense back up a little bit. So I think this was a smart move for them. In addition to Haley Wynn, they selected another defenseman, Riley Brinkman from Ohio State in the 4th round. When I saw that, my immediate thought was, I wonder if they're going to try and do some sort of marketing joke with the Red Sox Alex Bregman. Because at first I thought her name was Bregman, but there's an N in there. So that was where my brain went to immediately upon that, but I think she'll be another good defensive selection as well. The Fleet took 3 forwards and a goaltender as well, so that's 3 forwards, 2 defenders, and 1 goaltender in the draft on Tuesday night. They grabbed Ella Huber, a forward from Minnesota, as well as Olivia Mobley, a forward from Minnesota Duluth. And then Abby Newhook, a forward from Boston College, which her selection was one of the sweeter ones that I remember from watching the draft. She had so many of her BC teammates there, and they all had shirts for her, and it was really cute, and they were all just so excited. And then Boston wrapped it up by selecting goaltender Amanda Thiele from Ohio State. I honestly was kind of surprised by this, given the fact that we have Erin Frankel, Emma Soderberg, and got Abby Levy from New York during that free agency open signing period. I mean, having more depth on your roster, especially in terms of goaltenders, is never necessarily bad. I guess I just was kind of surprised that that was their selection. I would have been way more shocked if it had come earlier. It was their last pick in the 6th round. Their last pick, it was the 6th round. So there weren't necessarily a ton of options left per se, but just wasn't necessarily something that I was expecting from them. But so just to recap, in the draft, the Fleet added 3 forwards, 2 defenders, and 1 goaltender. And then during that free agency open signing period, they added 3 forwards, 2 defenders, and a goaltender as well. So that's 6 new forwards, 4 new defenders, and 2 new goaltenders that they've added. But like I said before, they lost 5 defenders and 3 forwards in to the expansion teams, but also amongst free agency and things like that. So lots of moves happening there. Again, like we talked about last week, Boston head coach Courtney Kessel left to lead the Princeton women's hockey program, and there's still no news as to who will be taking her place in Boston. There's a huge spider on the window in front of me, and I can't tell if it's inside or outside. I'm really hoping it's outside. But yes, there's no news yet as to who will be kind of taking the helm out in Boston. But they seemed to be fine during the draft. I mean, Danielle Marmer looked really calm the entire time, which really freaked me out. She was also wearing a really cool green suit that I enjoyed. So if you're like a fashion person, you should look it up. Highly recommend. But that is all that I have for Boston. So we're going to move on to the Minnesota Frost. The Minnesota Frost had pick 6 in the first round, so they were the final pick of the inaugural 6 teams because they were the Walter Cup champions. And with that first selection, they picked defenseman Kendall Cooper from Quinnipiac. Again, another smart decision, I think. The Frost lost 4 defenders in like the expansion period and everything like that, so kind of building back up the defense similar to Boston is something that I think is a smart decision for them. They picked Cooper and then 2 other defenders, Ava Rinker from UConn and Brooke Becker from Providence. And they also added Sydney Morin from Boston during that free agency open signing period. So they did really add all the defenders they lost. They, like I said, lost 4, then they lost 4 forwards as well during that whole expansion period and everything. So they did a pretty good job of kind of like filling in the losses that they had. On the forward side, they grabbed Abby Hustler and Anna Seghetti from St. Lawrence, both of them in the 2nd and 3rd rounds respectively. And then in the 5th round, they grabbed Vanessa Upson from Mercyhurst. So Minnesota, like we've talked about before a little bit, they're really secure in terms of goaltending. They re-signed Maddie Rooney to a 3-year contract during the open signing period, but they weren't really like looking for goaltenders at all, so I'm not really surprised that they didn't select any here. And they really only had 1 player sign that wasn't a re-sign during that open signing period. So not too many moves necessarily in terms of people going to Minnesota, but like I said, they did lose 8 players. So overall, they're operating with 1 less than they had before, I think. Yeah, they took 6 in the draft and then signed Sydney from Boston and lost 8. So yeah, they're really only down 1 player than they were before. And of course, who knows what could happen. I'm not entirely sure actually when the open signing period technically ends. I think like that is something I should know, so that's on me. But it's like there could be an opportunity for them to still add 1 more person and fill that spot. So it'll be interesting to kind of see what the reigning Walter Cup champions do moving forward. After Minnesota, we're going to switch over to Montreal. So the Victoire, they made a trade in the draft. I'm actually going to take the banner off the screen really quick so you can see at the bottom. In the 4th round, they traded their 4th round pick, so the 28th overall pick, and Kristen O'Neill to New York. Kristen O'Neill's a forward, and they received forward Abby Roque from New York. So there weren't too many trades. I think there were 4 total that happened in the draft, but that was one of them. That was pretty big. The first pick that they made was, it says 24 on the screen. That's my bad. But they picked 4th in the 1st round. They got Nicole Gosling from Clarkson, and her sister is actually in the league as well. I can't remember off the top of my head where she is, but she's on a new team now. I want to say she was on the Scepters or now is. I don't know. She's on one of the next graphics that we have, so it'll pop up. But they grabbed her. She's another defenseman, so that's another defenseman selection. That was really a theme early on in that 1st round. And then they didn't select another defenseman until the 6th round, and in those middle 4 rounds, they added 4 forwards. So Montreal really trying to kind of build back up, like every other team, the things that they lost. But for the Victoire specifically, they ended up losing 5 forwards, a goaltender, and 3 defensemen. So adding back that forward strength, that offensive strength is definitely something that they were thinking about. I think getting Abby Roque from New York is a really big move for them specifically. She's a great player. I also was really excited to see them select Skylar Irving from Northeastern in the 3rd round. Of course, you guys know my Northeastern bias, but Skirb is a player that I've consistently always just loved watching. She has such a good energy and like tenacity on the ice, and she's just enjoyable to watch from like an athletic standpoint, but also just in terms of players who play the game aggressively but with an analytical mindset. I think I'm really excited to see what she does in Montreal, and I think that was a really solid selection from them. And she was the only Northeastern player to go last night, which I thought made sense, but was super thrilled to see that selection for her. Overall, Montreal is in a pretty good spot, I would say. During that free agency open signing period, they added 5 players. They added 3 forwards and 2 defenders. So from Ottawa, they received forward Cheyenne Darkangelo, and then from Toronto, forward Haley Stamura. From Boston, defenseman Jessica DiGirolamo, and from Minnesota, also defenseman Maggie Flaherty. And then finally from New York, forward Jade Downey Landry. So they're really doing a great job of kind of filling the holes that they have from the expansion process, as every team does. I don't really think there was a team that did a crappy job of kind of repairing the losses that they had. But for Montreal specifically, they lost 10 players, and then they drafted... In the draft, they ended up getting 6, including Abby, and then 5 in that free agency open signing period. So they actually have 1 more player now than they did before. So actually, if you're thinking about it like that, they're doing the best because they have an extra person. But yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with the decisions that Montreal made. Like I said, there weren't any choices that I necessarily was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, they shouldn't have done that. There are definitely some that were interesting. And speaking of, we will go right on over to New York, who made so many moves. If you're watching the stream, I have like all the graphics up, and you can see the list of the moves that New York made specifically in the draft Tuesday night. And they drafted 2 players in round 1, 3 in round 4, and then 1 in rounds 2, 3, 5, and 6. So New York was out there making money moves on Tuesday night. It was honestly stressing me out a little bit because I was trying to like take notes, and I get confused when they switch their picks around too much. But New York did a lot. So like we just talked about with Montreal, they gave up Abby Roque in exchange for my God, why am I blanking on her name? It was Kristen O'Neill, right? Yeah. Oh, it's because it's at the bottom and the banner is covering part of the graphic. It was Kristen O'Neill. But so we talked about that. In the free agency open signing period, New York ended up losing 5 players. They lost 3 forwards, a goaltender, and a defenseman. In the expansion draft, they lost 2 forwards, and then in the expansion signing window, they lost a forward and a goaltender. So if you're keeping count, that is 8 goaltenders that they've lost, or goaltenders, excuse me, 8 forwards that they've lost. They lost 2 goaltenders, and they lost 1 defenseman. So definitely New York looking to add back some of that offensive strength, and they did a pretty good job of that. They had the first overall pick in the draft on Tuesday, and they went with a forward. Ironic, considering the majority of the other first-round picks were defensemen, but they ended up selecting Christina Kaltenkova from Colgate. She's a Czech player. There's a lot of accents in her name, so I might have mispronounced that, but she was a really influential player at Colgate. There was a lot of buzz around her. I think she made sense as a first-round pick, especially for New York, who really, really, really desperately need to add back that forward strength. And that's exactly what we saw them doing. Their first 4 selections were all forwards. And then in the 4th round, when they had those 3 picks, they snagged a defenseman, a forward, and a goaltender, followed by a forward and a goaltender in rounds 5 and 6. So they really kind of spread the wealth here. They did fill that one defender hole that they had lost in the open signing period, and they've got 2 goaltenders back as well. So they really did exactly what they needed to, and they weren't really afraid to be making the kind of moves that they needed to. They traded, they switched around a bunch of picks with teams, and I think there'll be, if I remember correctly, there are some trades that will influence the 2026 draft. But honestly, I gave New York a lot of crap for the shitty first 2 seasons that they had, and obviously we won't know how much of an effect these decisions will have, but ideally they did this in a very smart way, and I think if the decisions they made on paper play out on the ice well, then these moves and all of these trades will have been far and away the smartest decision for New York. So it'll be really interesting to see what kind of unfolds there. It was also really strange to note that they ended up trading, which I actually don't think I have on the graphic. They traded Ella Shelton to Toronto, which really surprised me considering they protected her as one of their 3 initial players in the expansion draft and signing window thing. And Ella Shelton's a defender, but just really gave me pause in the sense of I was curious as to, and I don't know, but just why they were willing to give her up now versus then. I think it'll be interesting to see what Ella does in Toronto, and if anything kind of I'm curious to see if any of the coaches will say anything about that or be asked about that by media in the future at all, because that definitely was something where I was that's a strange decision. And Ella was the one who they traded to get that 3rd pick, so the first round pick 3. New York picked first, and then they picked 3rd, and so that's when they got Casey O'Brien from Wisconsin, which is another really, really big grab for them. So overall, New York did really well. I have the questions about the Ella Shelton thing, and obviously these decisions could all have been crappy if suddenly everyone gets to New York and they all magically play like shit. So it'll really be interesting to see if these choices are as good as they seem right now. But we're going to move over to Ottawa. So the Charge had 3 additions to their roster during the open signing period, 2 defensemen and a forward. And during the open signing period, they lost 3 forwards and 2 defensemen. So filling some good gaps there in terms of just signings overall. In the expansion draft and signing window, they lost 4 players, 2 defensemen, a goaltender, and a forward. So overall, they've lost 4 defensemen, 4 forwards, and a goaltender. They've added a forward and 2 defensemen in the signing period, and then during the draft, they added 4 forwards, a defenseman, and a goaltender. So again, doing a really good job of kind of filling the needs that they had. Their first round pick, like many other teams, was a defenseman. They took Rory Gilday from Cordell. She had such excitement, as they all did, when they heard their name. I mean, you're getting drafted, you should be excited. But I remember Rory's interview specifically just because she was really bubbly, and I don't know what, that has literally nothing to do with her athletic talent whatsoever. But for some reason that just keeps sticking out in my head. Ottawa also grabbed 2 forwards from Dynamo Neva St. Petersburg, which is a Russian club. I had a really fun time trying to fit that long name on the graphic, but exciting for them. It's just kind of like another example of the PWHL growing and having more and more international players, which I think is great. And then aside from those 2 forwards, the Charge added 2 more, one from Wisconsin, one from Minnesota, and a goaltender from St. Cloud State as well. So they didn't have too much movement. They lost 9 players overall, and then they added back 9. So really keeping it even there. But I think they did a good job of kind of repairing what was broken by the expansion, so to speak. I didn't really have like a super strong reaction necessarily to any of the choices that they made the way I did with some of the other teams, but overall I think Ottawa came away from the Tuesday night draft in a pretty decent place. I don't really have too much else to say about them specifically. I'm fully looking at the graphic, seeing if another name jumps out at me that I forgot to mention. I don't think so. Lovely. All right, so we have Toronto and then the 2 expansion teams. I know this is so much information, but there was a lot of movement, and if I found myself getting slightly confused with who was going where, I'm sure so many other people are slightly confused, and so I think going over it is always helpful, but especially since the draft was so recent. But in terms of moves for Toronto, they were involved in that Ella Shelton New York trade, like I mentioned. So they traded Kristen Campbell, their goaltender, and their 3rd round pick to Vancouver and received Vancouver's 2nd round pick and 3rd round pick. And they also made that trade with Ella Shelton in New York. So with that trade, they lost their 1st round pick. Their first pick of the draft then was in the 2nd round with pick 11. They grabbed forward Emma Gentry from St. Cloud State. Overall, they ended up selecting 4 forwards and 1 defender in the draft, and then 2 if you count Ella Shelton. But they definitely were a little bit heavy on like the forwards that they lost in the whole expansion process. So again, like other teams, did a pretty good job of filling those gaps, but they are, I believe, they added 2 forwards in the open signing period and 4 in the draft, and they lost 6 originally. So that actually all evens out. Lovely. They ended up re-signing 5 players during that free agency open signing period. The 3 forwards, Natalie Spooner, Jessie Comper, and Maggie Connors, and then defensemen Callie Flanagan and Jess Condis. So definitely, it's been interesting actually to see teams like Toronto and Minnesota who are retaining a lot of their players and having a lot of players re-sign deals with them versus other teams who maybe are only retaining 1 or 2, which of course, so many different reasons for all of those things, but always just something I think is interesting to look at. Really quick before we talk about Seattle and Vancouver, I'm going to talk about the 2 new head coaches of those teams. So Seattle named Steve O'Rourke as their head coach, and he brings over 15 years of experience. Most recently, he spent 2.5 seasons with the OHL's Oshawa Generals. He spent 2 years as an assistant coach before being promoted to head coach last season. So a lot of coaching experience there, definitely some higher level coaching experience. It'll be interesting to kind of see what he does in this new role. I think, obviously, we haven't talked about their selections yet, but from the draft and overall just from all the selections in the expansion process, I think he's in a good place in terms of like the sense that he has a good foundation. Obviously, he was only named just a few days ago, so he wasn't making many of those initial expansion decisions. But I do think with their GM and everything, I think he has kind of the tools he needs to succeed. And based on his resume, it sounds like he should have a pretty good idea of what he's doing. So that's pretty exciting. And then on the Vancouver side, they ended up naming Brian Idalski. So he's bringing over 20 years of experience. And he most recently was coaching at head coach at St. Cloud State for the last 3 seasons. So even from just the draft results from the inaugural 6, I said St. Cloud State multiple times. They have a really productive program. They're always in like the top 20 in the NCAA rankings and things like that. So he's definitely someone that has experience with women's hockey at a very high level and like in a successful way. So I think like if you're comparing the two, I would have like a little bit more confidence in Brian and Vancouver than I would in Steve in Seattle, but who knows? Maybe they'll make me eat my words here come fall/winter, whenever the season starts. But on that note, we are going to talk about who Seattle ended up selecting. So in the draft, they ended up having pick 8, so that last pick of the first round. The order for Seattle and Vancouver, it was always going to be 7 and 8 for those 2 expansion teams, was just decided by like I think like a coin flip. It was like somehow random, but I think it was literally a coin flip. And then they ended up switching for every subsequent round. So Seattle grabbed Jenna Buglioni from Ohio State. She's a forward with their first round pick. And then from there, they went on and selected 3 other forwards, a goaltender, and a defender. So Seattle and Vancouver obviously are building from scratch. And I think the way that they're both going about it is really smart. Both teams like they did a really solid job of kind of getting best available, but like we've talked about before, like I do think that the PWHL made it tried to overcompensate for the fact that these were new teams. I think these teams now have a little bit more in terms of roster strength than the original 6 do. But it'll be interesting to kind of see how that all plays out. But aside from Jenna from Ohio State, they also signed Hannah Murphy, who was a goaltender at Colgate. That's a pick that I'm pretty excited about. They signed Corinne Schroeder from New York during the expansion signing window. So as of now, those are their 2 goaltenders. And I think having Corinne as your goaltender, I'm really confident in, but also then having someone who's already a really good goaltender, but who can then also learn from Corinne is really, really smart. Obviously, like they can't just have one goaltender, but with Hannah specifically, I think that's going to be a good selection and partnership in terms of like how she can grow as a player and like kind of like learning from the vets and things like that. And then, yeah, we've talked a lot about Seattle and Vancouver in terms of who they grabbed in the expansion draft and signing window and things like that. So I don't necessarily want to beat a dead horse with this. So yeah, like I said, 4 forwards, a defender, and a goaltender were who they grabbed in the draft on Tuesday. They didn't make any trades or anything either. So relatively simple night for them. I did completely not realize that Northeastern's women's hockey head coach Dave Flint is like an advisor for PWHL Seattle, and he was like fully at the table for the entire draft. And I was like watching the draft, writing on my laptop, and I like looked up and I was like, oh my god, it's Dave Flint. And I texted my friend about it, and she was like, girl, he's been an advisor for them like this entire time. I don't know how I missed that, but shout out to him. because he's awesome. Finally, we have our last team. We're going to talk about Vancouver. So they added 3 forwards, 2 defenders, and a goaltender in the draft on Tuesday. Their first-round pick was the 7th selection. They grabbed Michelle Karvinen, a forward from Frölunda Hockey Club. I'm pretty sure she's Swedish. It's either Swedish or Finnish. I can't remember. But Vancouver then in the second round made a trade with Toronto. So they gave Toronto their second round pick, third round pick, and then they ended up getting goaltender Kristen Campbell and Toronto's third round pick. So just a little bit of like switching around there. I mean, Vancouver's second round pick was 16th overall, and then Toronto's third round pick was 19th overall, and they swapped those two. And then Toronto got another pick as well. But so just some interesting kind of movement things really happening there. Aside from that first round pick and Campbell, they went on to select 2 defenders and 2 forwards. So really kind of like keeping things relatively evened out. Both Seattle and Vancouver each only have 2 goaltenders, which I think is fine. Like the inaugural 6 usually I want to say had 3. So like, and I mean sometimes they had 2 too. Like I think we just had in Boston Aaron Frankel and Emma Soderberg for a while and like no one else. But so I'm not like super concerned necessarily that both of these teams only have 2 goaltenders. But like I said, I'm not 100% clear on like when the signing window closes. So there is potentially an opportunity for like goaltenders that might have gone undrafted to get like picked up by these teams. I think. Don't quote me on that though, actually, because I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, overall, Vancouver I think has a pretty solid roster. It's pretty even in terms of forwards, like offense and defense. I want to say they have like 3 or 4 more forwards than defenders. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but like I said, obviously both these teams are building from scratch, so there's really like a lot to consider, and like when you're starting with no players, you can't really go wrong with getting anyone. So that is kind of where they're at. But now that I have spent a significant amount of time really just like freaking hammering you with PWHL draft details, we're going to really quickly celebrate 3 women being named to the Hockey Hall of Fame. So Jennifer Botterill, Brianna Decker, and Danielle Sauvageau. I don't think that's right. I literally listened to like the pronunciation of her name because I always screw it up like before I recorded this episode, and I literally think I still screwed it up. But Jennifer is one of the most decorated Canadian women's players of all time. She won 5 World Championship gold medals and helped Canada to Olympic golds in 2002, 2006, and 2010. And she played for all 4 years of her career at Harvard. So definitely like a really notable athlete just in women's hockey overall. Even though she retired in 2011 before like pro women's hockey really started to get going and things like that. She's still someone that's like super notable and like looked at as like one of the best Canadian women's players of all time. So really exciting that she's like getting that recognition. And then Brianna Decker, this was her first year of eligibility, so she's one of only a few women's players to get in on that first year of eligibility. And she just retired in 2022. She's only 34. So she represented the U.S. at the Olympics 3 times and won gold in 2018. And she won 6 World Cups as well as an Isabel Cup championship with the Boston Pride in the National Women's Hockey League back in 2016. So someone that's definitely been around professional women's hockey for some time, or like not some time, but like recently. And I think it's really sick that she's getting in on her first year of eligibility. That's always really cool. I know there are a lot of like Chara from the Bruins this year is getting in on his first year of eligibility. Like it's always really notable like men that get that opportunity, and so I think it's great that they're giving it to Brianna as well. And then finally, Danielle, whose name I can never say, she's making history as the first woman to be inducted as a builder. She was also the first woman to coach in the QMJHL when she was an assistant coach for the Montreal Rocket. And right now she is GM of Montreal Victoire. So shout out to her. It was really fun during the draft because the Hockey Hall of Fame like news came out that morning of the draft. And so Danielle obviously was at the draft, like making selections for Montreal. And so they celebrated her a little bit on the draft stream, which I thought was really sweet. But that is all the hockey news I have for you. Before we get into some WNBA stuff, we are gonna take a quick break to hear from our friends at Playback.
Presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together, with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about, win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. And now back to the show.
Welcome back. Okay, I did briefly lie to you because before WNBA news, I just want to mention that the NWSL is officially on their league break, which started on Monday, and they won't be back until August because that whole July is when all like the international competitions happen and everything. So we'll have about a month without NWSL soccer, but if you're itching for your women's soccer fix, you think luckily like we'll have all the international competitions to watch. You won't have to completely go without, which is nice. But now that I've mentioned that, we can get into the WNBA news. So the $1.5 billion sale of the Minnesota Timberwolves finally happened. So they're selling from Glenn Taylor to an investment group with this like e-commerce guy and then A-Rod from the Yankees. And they finally got NBA approval Tuesday, which this has been like a over 4-year process of like trying to get a deal to sell the Timberwolves and everything. And the deal includes ownership of the Lynx as well. And it's been like, according to the AP, nearly 51 months and more than 1,500 days since the initial agreement. But it's a very interesting situation because like the guy that owns them right now tried to stop this transfer last year, and the league board of governors with the NBA, with like all 30 team owners, unanimously voted to like pass now. Even though like he's been trying to stop it for like forever. And I mean, like, obviously, like, I don't think he votes in this like unanimous vote or whatever. And I don't know like enough about like the NBA intricacy side of like things like in this situation specifically, but it does like make me kind of uneasy that they're just like lumping the Lynx in with everything, especially like, I mean, like it's like weird in general, but like the Lynx are also like a very, very productive, talented team in the WNBA. Like I feel like they shouldn't just be like tossing it around with and just being like, oh yeah, like you're gonna get by the Timberwolves, like take this too. Like that's obviously not as complicated as it is, but because so much of the focus is on the NBA side of things, and like, yeah, like this e-commerce guy and A-Rod can say like as much as they want that it's like Minnesota as a whole. Like, unfortunately, I feel like the male side's like always going to get more attention. Although I don't know, with the way the WNBA is exploding, like maybe maybe they're really looking at it with like dollar signs in their eyes and they're really excited. I accidentally looked at the spider on the window again. It's still there. But yeah, sorry. It's also like huge. It's really stressing me out. Anyway, yeah, it'll be kind of like interesting to see what ends up unfolding and how they end up treating the Lynx versus the Timberwolves. It's one of those things that I'm kind of like watching, not expecting it to go super well per se, but who knows what could happen. The opponents for the Commissioner's Cup are finalized. So the Commissioner's Cup will be Tuesday, July 1st at 7 Central, and you can watch it on Prime Video, which like feels kind of random to me, but whatever. I guess Jeff Bezos is really taking over the world. He and I share birthdays, and it like actually really upsets me that I know he's celebrating on my day. Anyway, speaking of the Lynx, they are going to be competing in the Commissioner's Cup again this year. They're the defending champions, and it'll be their second straight appearance in the game, and they're going to host the Indiana Fever. So that will be pretty interesting considering what's like going on with the Fever right now. They just waived all-star DeWanna Bonner, and she hasn't played in a game for the Fever since the 10th and hasn't been around the team since the 12th, but they like weren't able to find a suitable trade partner for Bonner, who's like I said, she's an all-star, but she's a 6-time all-star. So kind of an interesting like situation there in the sense that now she's just like out flying solo until someone picks her up. But the team also announced that it's signing Ari McDonald, who played in 3 games and averaged 11 points while she was on a hardship waiver for the Fever earlier in the season. So they're like losing Bonner but adding McDonald. But then overall, the weirder thing is like Caitlin Clark is having issues. So you're listening on Friday, but I'm recording this on a Wednesday. So earlier today, the Fever and the Storm played in Seattle. The Fever won 94-86. And Caitlin Clark played like actual trash. It was super weird. And like I'm trying not to like do the thing that like people do to Angel Reese where like all of a sudden she has a like one bad game and everyone's like, oh my god, what the hell? But like Caitlin went 3 for 13 with field goals. She missed all 6 3-point attempts. She only scored 6 points. And then she had 9 assists, which like is great, 8 turnovers, and 2 rebounds. 3 steals, which isn't bad either. But like it was so strange and so unlike her, and like I give a lot of credit to the Storm for like really freaking staying on her and like not letting her do what she does. But also Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell. Aaliyah had 31 points and Mitchell had 26. Like they really both like showed up and showed out in this game, and so I think like obviously like if they play like that, they're like still gonna have a chance, but like Caitlin Clark better figure her shit out before they have this Commissioner's Cup, because Boston and Mitchell can't like be the only ones really carrying the team. And Lexi Hall as well. She had 15 points too. So credit where it's due for all of them. But another like struggle with shooting going on in the league. The Atlanta Dream on Tuesday lost to the Dallas Wings 68-55 and had their worst shooting performance in franchise history. They shot 15 for 64, which is a whopping 23.4%, and that's the worst shooting game by any team in the W since 2010, which is actually crazy. And it's crazier when you like think about the fact that it's the Dream. Like they're 4th in the league. They're not bad. Like they're not like the Wings or the Sun, who are only won like a handful of games this season. It just seems like a very random outlier for that to be like happening, especially against the Wings of all teams, like I said. So yeah, definitely just kind of like a bit of a strange period in the league this week for like lack of a better way to describe it. But on a little bit of a happier note, the Mystics had an absolutely awesome win over the Lynx. They won 68-64, and it was a really intense game. The Lynx ended up going on a 16-2 run, and at one point, Washington was trailing from by 14, 20-6. But Shakira Austin, who was named Eastern Conference Player of the Week earlier in the day, helped start a 14-2 run to get Washington really like just within 2 points. And then that momentum just went on and on into the second quarter and into the second half as well. And Washington really kind of like ended up pushing into the lead. And then the Lynx ended up reclaiming the advantage with an 11-4 run that was capped off with a buzzer beater putback by Jessica Shepard to close the third with a 55-54 edge. So there was definitely a lot going on in that game. I wasn't able to watch the entire thing, but I watched part of it, and then I watched like all the highlights, of course. There were 6 lead changes in the final stretch of the game, so it was really definitely like one of those like down to the wire moments, and I give a lot of credit to the Mystics for just like sticking with it and staying in it despite being down multiple times and by so many points, especially against the Mystics, who have not lost many times this season at all. And then, of course, Angel Reese is doing more Angel Reese things in the Skies 97-86 win over the Sparks Tuesday. She joined MVPs Candace Parker, Tamika Catchings, and Tina Charles as the only WNBA players to record at least 15 points, 15 rebounds, 5 assists, and 4 steals in a single game. So, anytime I see a solid Angel Reese stat line, you're going to have to hear about it from me. I'm sorry. It's just the rules. I was about to say I don't care, and then I was about to say I don't make the rules. I don't care what you think. I do care about Angel Reese, and I do make the rules. So that was all confusing. It's been a long week. Quickly here before we wrap up, I'm just going to go over the games that we have this weekend in the W. So there are 11 games, 5 on Friday, 5 on Sunday, and then just 1 on Saturday. So Friday, you have 2 games at 6:30 Central, Minnesota Lynx at Atlanta Dream, and Indiana Fever at Dallas Wings. And then 3 games at 9 Central, Chicago Sky at Golden State Valkyries, New York Liberty at Phoenix Mercury, and Connecticut Sun at Seattle Storm. That 1 game on Saturday is going to be at 7 p.m. Central, Washington Mystics at Dallas Wings. And then Sunday, all the games are at different times. So at 2 p.m., you have New York Liberty at Atlanta Dream. 3 p.m., Chicago Sky at Los Angeles Sparks. 5 p.m., Las Vegas Aces at Phoenix Mercury. 6 p.m., Connecticut Sun at Minnesota Lynx. And 7:30 p.m., Seattle Storm at Golden State Valkyries. So, lots to be on the lookout for this weekend in terms of WNBA stuff. But that is really all I have for you. So thanks so much for listening to episode 6 of Sarah Says So. Make sure you're following at Sarah Says So ETB on all socials, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, as well as all podcast platforms. And I will see you next week.